urine therapy is exactly what you think it is. It is drinking your own urine. And so, yeah, you got to have that reaction. I did do it for about 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And for anyone that says, wow, that is the worst thing, it has traumatized me. It is the one thing in my life that I don't use that term lightly. It is the one thing in my life that has genuinely traumatized me. When people say the word, oh, that's the worst thing I've ever had. When they say that, they're like, oh, like you're eating something. They're, oh, it's the worst. I go, shut the fuck up. You don't know what's the worst.
I was about to ask what it tastes like. Welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. What is going on? Welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast. I got an amazing guest. You may know him already, the OG Diabeto, Ed. What's going on?
What's happening, dude? Thank you for having me. Appreciate you calling me on the Potter.
I'm just hyped that you're here because I feel like we've been trying to get this to happen for a while. And then you went off to Japan, which is somewhere where low key, like I think I've 14 people over the past 2 months been like, I'm going to Japan. I'm like, what am I missing? Like, am I missing something?
Yeah, dude, I don't know when and where that happened. In fact, we had friends on the same flight home as us. So that was like the craziest bit too. Yeah, I don't know. I've never had that happen before where you're like, oh, I know people on this flight. Especially when you're like 4,000 kilometers or like 2,500 freedom units away. Sorry. So anyway, no, it's a great place to visit, to be honest. And yeah, we had a lot of fun, but definitely jet lagged, which has been, as you can imagine. And I think your followers are a lot of diabetics. So Diabeto's blood sugar has been hurting a little bit, but we're doing okay. So,
well, and I've never talked about jet lag on here. I really don't think I ever have. So people, of course, you shift time zones. Japan's funky because you're going across the date line, right? So like, did you leave and it was like tomorrow, but then you came back and it was like the day before? Like, how did that work?
So on the way there was actually really funny. Ironically, my blood sugars were a little bit more okay, but I think it was mainly just because I slept. So on the way there, you leave in like mid-afternoon and then you arrive the next day in like 6 p.m. So I left at like 3 and then arrived the next day at 6 p.m. And mind you, I'm PST, so because I live in Vancouver. So it was actually, that's probably the best time zone to leave from. Like it would have been even more messed up if you left from like New York or Florida, like EST. So it just gets progressively more messed up the further away you get, kind of thing. But yeah, so and then you were the next day. So I think we left on the Friday. No, we left on a Saturday and arrived Sunday night. So you lose a completely whole day traveling on a flight that was only like 10 hours and you lose like effectively over 24 hours, and which is crazy. Yeah. And then on the way back, even weirder, you feel like you enter a time machine because we left at 10 p.m. and then we arrived technically the same day here. So we left on the Sunday and we arrived here also on the Sunday. After traveling 12 hours, leaving at 10 p.m., the flight was, it wasn't 12 hours. It was like 10-ish. And then you arrive here at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So you literally went back in time.
I just got to know, because first of all, I'm still trying to my brain's melting, trying to process the fact that you literally went in a time machine. But then how in tarnation did your blood sugars handle that? Because, and we'll get into all the who you are, et cetera, but how did the blood sugars handle that? Or was it just like, dude, they have no idea what's going on. They're just all over the map right now.
Yeah, I actually shockingly was like relatively okay. Like when I got off the plane, the tough part is for me, I'm on injection. So I think that's an important context for everyone. I use Tresiba and I used to use Humalog, but now it's Fiasp. I now use Fiasp. So I'm a recent convert. But yeah, I definitely ran a little bit on the higher side because I took my nighttime, my Tresiba as I was kind of boarding the plane. That's when I'm a nighttime dosage. I realize I shouldn't call it nighttime. I call it nighttime insulin to the people around me because that just like makes more sense to them. But I realize there's a lot of other diabetos listening. So I should probably be, my basal insulin is Tresiba. So I took that leading onto the plane as normal. But the problem is when you get off the plane, Now, and I messed that up. Normally, I'll take it in the next time zone, but since this time zone was so far, I actually couldn't take it that early or that late, I suppose. So I took it early, and then I would have had to take it again just a few hours after I got off the plane, which would have been, again, once we hit 10 o'clock here on Sunday, so yesterday, I would have had to take it again after, but I didn't. So overnight, it was a little bit strange, but I just kind of take it a little bit early. My methods of dealing with it is I take it a little bit earlier and just try to slowly get back to across 3 days to get back to my normal time. So I'm still currently not on my normal Tresiba time or my normal basal insulin time. But yeah, I ran high for a little bit, which I thought I would run low, but I didn't. I ran high, which I think has a lot more to do with the dehydration on the plane.
Yep.
Yeah. And so it's wild also because you think about it, you're like, oh man, but I drank so much water. I think that's such a funny concept. Like Jesse got off the plane and was like, no, I drank lots of water. And I'm like, but we were on a plane for 12 hours. Like how much on a normal, that's like a whole work day, right? Like sure, maybe it was a little less than 12 hours, but that's more than a whole work day. How many water bottles do you drink in a whole work day? Like 2, right? Or I'm larger in size. So this is a liter. I think how many ounce? This is 32 ounce.
Yeah,
A liter. So it's a liter. And so I'll drink that during a work day, like 3 of them, two to 3 of them. And that's when I feel good, right? But on that plane, I drank like half of one, right? Like,
because unless you keep pushing the call button, you're like, give me more, give me. And I have no shame in doing that. If it's a longer flight, I'm like, I need more water and I will piss every hour if I have to. Because at least then I know I'm at baseline. But it's tough, right?
Yeah,
Otherwise,
I actually, and we talked about this briefly before recording, but I'll give the context to everyone. I actually had the exit aisle. And so I actually couldn't reach. Oh, but swear, guys, I'm a little bit taller than 4 foot. And so, yeah, no, I couldn't reach it. And it was like awkward positioning and I would have elbowed the person beside me. So I didn't want to do that. And so I didn't actually press it all that often. But thankfully I was in the exit aisle so they could see me. And then if I ever like needed something, I was like, hey, yo, what's up? So
probably would have just like leaned in and been like, I'm doing this for the Beatus and just pushed it anyway and just seen what happened. And they'd probably be like, what are you talking about? Or they'd be pissed or both, but who cares?
Yeah. Wait, did he just say he's doing this for the beep test? No, beaties, diabetes. Yeah, that's
exactly. And you have to say it diabetes, otherwise it doesn't count.
Exactly.
I feel like, and it's wild. It's like, I feel like I'm vicariously jet lagged through you right now. Cause I feel like you're like, woof, like just surviving off of vibes. And I'm over here just like, I feel it. And I haven't even gone on a plane in like a month. So.
Dude, I can't lie. I'm happy to be back and like back into routine, especially because there's in the last little bit, I've got a lot of videos to catch up on, but and a lot of work outside of that to catch up on. But yeah, which I guess is probably the next thing I should mention to people why I'm.
Well, why I was gonna say, yeah, tell us just about, how you are Diabeto to begin with, because there are people that may not be familiar with the infamous videos. And of course, we'll get into some of those because they are a riot if you are not watching them.
So, yeah, I mean, Diabeto, for anyone that doesn't know, I'm going to give a shout out to my buddy Robert because I'm sure he'll end up watching this. He's a good friend of mine, long-term friend of mine. And he also is a great supporter of a lot of my videos and will end up watching most of these things, him and his wife, Marta. And so when we were younger, like he's been one of my longest friends. And when we were younger, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Family Guy, wherever you guys are listening from. There is an infamous clip that is only like 10 seconds in duration and it only appears once ever. And it's about the diabetics or pre-diabetic son, Diabeto. And he makes an appearance and is like, Mama, can I have cookie? No, Diabeto, roll back to kitchen. And so they have that little scene pop in Family Guy. And ever since that came out, he's been calling me Diabeto, right? Because I do have diabetes. And obviously, I've never looked anything like the character. But yeah, I kind of just leaned into it. And like, they've been calling me that. I don't think Robert, like that friend Robert, he sure maybe teased it a little bit, but they've never it was never a bullying thing.
Right.
Some people did take it that way for sure when they heard him call it or other people call it. Some people definitely took it the wrong way, but I'm sure many diabetics have dealt with bullying in their own way, but that was, for me, it was more of an endearment and I just kind of ran with it from there. And then, yeah, started making videos online. Not all of it was reaction videos all the time, but it seems as though people like to watch me react to things, both true and untrue on the internet. But yeah, from there, I just started making videos pointing out pseudoscience. And I will say, exclusive on the Potter, that diabetes is like the entire reason I hate pseudoscience. And it's the entire reason I got into my nutrition degree, my nutrition and dietetics degree, which I actually showed for the first time. It's actually right here.
Hey,
Still unframed, by the way, still in the packaging.
I'm right there with you on mine.
Yeah.
I don't know where it is, but I know it's in an envelope.
Yeah. So never really felt the need to put it up anywhere because I don't know. I have no idea why. But yeah, that was diabetes was the entire thing that got me into nutrition, a nutrition and dietetics degree. I actually was leaning more towards something like kinesiology, but then I had a conversation with my kinesiologist at the time and he like verbatim said, don't do it. And yeah, and I think in hindsight, I think he knew me a little bit better than I thought. And I think that's why he steered me in the direction of something else. He didn't really say nutrition. I think I just kind of found nutrition. And that, I always thought I was going through at that time, you're like 11th, 12th grade, or I guess junior and senior, I think is how you guys call it. So the last 2 years of high school. And so I was really trying to find out what I wanted to do with my life. And everyone's always like, oh, what are you interested in? I don't know, man. I play tennis every day. I have no idea. So I was like, I'm interested in sports, I guess. And then I really did get like, I think it was a lot to do with what he asked me in one of our sessions. So it's super funny. The guy was a career counselor instead of helping me more with the kinesiology work. But no, I'm obviously joking, but he definitely helped me to understand like, oh, I'm like in my spare time, what am I doing? Oh, in my spare time, I'm trying to decipher literature. Like I was already trying to do that. And only now, retrospect is 2020, right? Where I realized I had mixed success with my ability to read research, but I was pretty decent at interpreting research even at the time. Like I was already kind of thinking critically, like, oh, like this methodology doesn't really measure this outcome, right? Like, or things like that. I do remember like finding a few that I was like, this doesn't make sense. And like my parents would be like, shut the fuck up, go over there, shut up. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, leave the science to the scientists. Like, or, obviously my parents were very supportive, but yeah, they didn't understand it either. So they're just like, move on.
Well, and now, I mean, you've obviously read a ton of literature. You obviously are in the field. And of course, diabetes is rampant with pseudoscience. And I think it's hilarious because then, like you and I can jam out on stuff like this, but also make videos, not mocking it, but just giving a perspective that's actually informed. I think you're one of the worst or a few of the worst pseudoscience things you've seen out there specific to diabetes, because people with diabetes may or may not know, depending on who's saying it, if it's actually legit or not.
Yeah. So a new one so I'm going to give you the original where I heard it. I don't know the person, but now it's coming out to someone who is a very popular, I'll say clouted, because I don't think that they're intelligent actually. And I don't think that they're a well-informed choice. But the original one that I think is the most dangerous, which is kind of the reason that I got into this entire space in and of itself, is urine therapy. I have never talked about this online, but I had to do that as a kid growing up. So I went to a Chinese medicine, we'll call it a doctor. That it's not. But again, I was 15 at the time, 14, 15. No, I was 15. I must have been 15. And that would have been first 2 years of my diagnosis. And my parents were, again, I don't hate my parents for it, but it definitely clouded our relationship for a really long time because they really wanted, the best for me. They wanted me to find a cure if possible. It's always what pseudoscience is rooted in. Pseudoscience sells you on a story and a possibility. And so it's nothing, and it really is a distraction from the science. It's like, hey, well, what are you'll ask the question. And my parents used to ask these questions, right? But then they get marketed this like opportunity. Well, what if? And so what really ended up happening was this woman convinced my parents that this woman and her husband, who were Chinese medicine doctors, who were paid cash, by the way, so that you can never you can never go back on anything. So they're in Waterloo, Canada. So if you're in Waterloo, Canada, looking for a Chinese medicine doctor, fucking don't do it. Forgive my cursing, but don't do it. Chinese medicine is a lot of things. There is a lot of good aspects of it, which again, research looks at when we have all of these old school like ways of thinking. People are always like, oh, the Western way is not the way. The Western way confirms whether or not, like, we do scientific literature, scientific studies, we conduct it on these old school ways of being, and have determined whether or not they work. Of course, at the time, I did not know that. I was, going through it. I was not, but this was kind of what prompted my first introduction to reading literature, right? Was because I didn't understand how to properly look up search terms. Like, search terms are very important to get to find out the literature. So, I'm going on a little rabbit hole here, a little adventure, but try to stick with me. If you search up, like, is urine therapy good for you? You're not going to get the response that you're looking for. Google is going to stray you away into some blog article that thinks it is what you want to see, right? And it's going to be some mom and pop shop blog that says, yeah, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And you're like, okay, I guess that's the thing. And for those of you that don't know, I should give a preamble. Urine therapy is exactly what you think it is. It is drinking your own urine. And so, you got to have that reaction. I did do it for about 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And for anyone that says, wow, that is the worst thing, it has traumatized me. It is the one thing in my life that I don't use that term lightly. It is the one thing in my life that has genuinely traumatized me. When people say the word, oh, that's the worst thing I've ever had. When they say that, they're like, oh, like you're eating something. They're like, oh, it's the worst. I go, shut the fuck up. You don't know what's the worst. And so they sell it to you on the idea that like, oh, eventually you're going to keep drinking and it's going to taste sweet. It never tasted sweet, by the way. And it tastes like exactly what it smells like.
I was about to ask what it tasted like. So I'm over here. I know back in the day, like ancient Greeks would like taste it to know if you had diabetes, but I had to know if it just tastes foul.
Oh, it's foul. It's a waste product created by your body. That's the best way I'll say it. And like, if anyone is at home listening on the fence about this, I hope to God they just jump onto the correct side of the fence, please. Yeah, don't do it. And it's not because like it'll harm you, it's sterile, whatever, but it's just, it'll harm your mental, your relationship with your parents. Like, and God bless my parents, honestly. My mom was ready to commit with me and do it with me just to like, it wasn't, again, I have to be careful of how I phrase it because somebody's going to be out here going, oh, terrible parents. Like my parents spent all of their money that they had, which by the way, we are not well off. So they spent all of the money that they had, cash, all the stuff they were taxed on, and they would pay it in cash to some woman. So there's no, business recap. There's no expensing this. Like you can't expense this. So they would spend all of their money on these processes with the hope that, and by the way, they would change my diet. I was eating it was like an all boiled diet for a while and it was disgusting. Oh, it was terrible. And on top of that, you're trying to maintain I couldn't eat yeast. I couldn't eat a bunch of things. So my mom was cooking round the clock on top of working full time. And then, so in hindsight, I'm like, damn, she really committed to this, and my dad did too, right? Because this was expensive. So he would start working longer days to just try to make it make sense. And so, yeah, they did that for a while until I hit a snapping point, which I think I've always been, if my parents are watching, they probably will be watching. So I hit a snapping point and I think I've been always pretty respectful with my parents. And I still think I'm pretty respectful for them. But until that moment, I don't think I've ever sworn. They maybe have heard me swear, but I don't even think I cursed around them. So that, to give you that level of how I behave around my parents, they were never my friends. They were my parents. And so for all those people that are friends with their parents, very different relationship with me. And so there's a certain respect hierarchy, and that just was gone that day when I just snapped. Because I bottled it up for 6 months. I didn't want to do it. And then I kind of hit a point where I'm like, guys, this is clearly not making any meaningful benefit. And if you don't know what critical thinking is, that whole process will really make you critically think. And it's in and of itself, I think, while diabetes and that process is traumatizing for me, I think it's given me my entire career. So I don't regret it. In a weird way, I don't regret drinking my own piss, because now whenever people think oh man, that tasted terrible, I have a very different output. I'm like, that was amazing. So in a weird way, I think is the greatest blessing is in disguise, which made me really think about pseudoscience. But yeah, now there's a specific Dr. Ampa, and that's not his real name, but if you know, you know. He's been pushing it now. I don't know if he's specifically pushing it for diabetes, but I've seen the term in the comments, and it's really annoying to me because they sell it as eventually it'll start tasting less sweet. It'll be less sweet. And I'm like, and even in that moment, by the way, guys, for anyone wondering at home, I know I'm going on a rampage here, but it was even in that moment I asked, are you sure this works? What's the mechanism by which this works? That was the first time I asked like, what's the method by which this works? I don't think I used the term mechanism. Also, the lady was like hardcore Chinese, barely spoke English. So, but I asked like, how does it work as a method? And then, they point at those things on the wall where it's like the foot pressure points and they just kind of make up a mechanism with their hand. Yeah, that's the equivalent of muscle testing from naturopaths. Sorry to all the naturopaths that watch me, but yeah.
Because the first thing I think of when you start talking about urine therapy is vividly in like 4th, 5th grade, you watch those animal documentaries about like the Sahara and how like sometimes
Bear Grill,
right, when it's a drought, like they have to like eat their own,
yeah.
They have to drink their, and like that's the first thing I thought of, and I'm like, last I checked, I don't think Canada's, at least where you are, is a desert per se.
No, it's not.
Right. So I'm just like, that is first off hardcore. Also, salute your parents to the dedication, because that's like another level. I have to say that. And to parents that are listening, that dedication, but applied in a different mechanism, would be fantastic if your kid has diabetes. So please, take that. And I have but whoa.
Yeah, I definitely, now the older I get and the more I get exposed to pseudoscience, the more and more understanding I am of like the direction of which, like, why they took it. And also I get older and think like, they're parenting for the first time. So yeah, if there are any parents watching this, that wasn't, that was a little bit cathartic for me to let out for the first time on the internet. But I also want to like acknowledge, like, it's not easy to be a parent. It's not easy to be a parent of diabetes. It's super stressful. Like, it's to be a sibling of diabetes, right? Like, I can't imagine what my brother went through watching this all, and he kind of just feels helpless. Like, what's he supposed to do, right? It's not easy, but at the same time, to your point, I think trying to trust the system and trying to take that energy that you have towards helping and like really honing it in on the system. So for example, instead of spending that same amount of money, which was, I believe they spent like $300 or $400 per visit, which I guess in American terms is not like that much for healthcare, but we would do it often. So it wasn't like, I guess most Americans don't see their doctor more than a few times, more than once a month. I don't know of a single American that sees their doctor more than once a month. So this was like once every 2 weeks. Yeah. And on top of that, it was like a 2.5 hour drive, 2.5, 3 hour drive each direction. Right. So if I would to tell any parent watching, it would be, think about all of that commitment. And it's not just like, it's a long-term. Think about what you can give to the long-term. Like, yeah, to my parents, maybe $300 on one visit isn't a lot, but these things are long-term. These things that they suck you in to try to squeeze you in on that was an old school subscription model. That was before subscription models even existed. So they suck them in on 6 months. So just do the quick math, right? If it was $300 per visit on 6 months, every 2 weeks, it's a lot of money and a lot of time wasted on driving, where we could have created family memories. We could have spent all that money on Whole Foods. We could have spent, which they did also, right? Like, my parents didn't give that up, but it's just,
right.
If you're a parent right now and you're thinking, oh, maybe I don't know, maybe I'm struggling paycheck to paycheck. Well, I'll just give $100. Maybe it won't be 300 for these people, but somebody tells them it's 100. Well, just imagine where that 100 could go in terms of grocery shopping, in terms of a new activity for their kid to keep them moving, in terms of taking their kid on hikes, in terms of taking their kids on a family trip, which would reduce their stress and maybe make them more physically active, right? Like, all of these things. And again, I think those things are more important. And oftentimes, if I could give one piece of advice to a parent specifically, especially one that does not have diabetes, but has a child with diabetes, is that child does not want to feel less normal. Yeah. So like, that is like the hardest part of living, I think, with it, because in one way, diabetes is like super normal. Like, once you can, I know it's hard, so bear with me, take this as a grain of salt, but living with diabetes is quite normal, with the exception of the 6 injections you take a day. So obviously there's that side where you have to do all of these things. You have to do the checks, the finger pokes, maybe the CGMs, the change of pump sites, the tubing, all of that. Sure, you have that. But when that's actually in control, your life is the same as anyone else's. It's like, I like to imagine, it's like, just imagine everyone else has 20 hours and you have 24 as a diabetic, right? Or rather, as a diabetic, you have 20, everyone else has 24. Yeah. Sorry, flip them. So I think maybe that's even an exaggeration. Maybe it's 22 to 24. You still have those hours. Like, you still have a normal life. It's not like we're amputees. I mean, some unfortunately do become that, but with poorer control and genetics and other things. But yeah, it's just like, that's what I want parents to focus on, is like, how far are you willing to push, and how much of it is your selfish desire to like tell yourself that your kid is normal. Your kid is a good kid. Diabetes, their inability to produce insulin doesn't change who they are as a person.
Well, and I think not only is that a huge point too, where it's saying, hey, you know, we can be normal. We absolutely can. I feel like I advocate for it all the time. You advocate for it all the time.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, with the directing of the parental energy, like also don't take every single thing that the ADA puts out at face value either. Be like, oh, well, the ADA said it, so therefore it's perfect. Like it's typically not going to be on either of the extremes. Like you're not going to get the, hey, I'm drinking okra water and, you know, sniffing lines of cinnamon. But on the flip side, those are my personal favorites, and I'll share. But then on the flip side, like the ADA doesn't mean that's the gospel either. It's typically somewhere in the middle, but finding the evidence base to support it. And if you're not sure, hey, does this supplement look good with diabetes? Search it. Literally, like it's not, and I'm not saying, you know, like you mentioned, search terms are very important, but something as simple as, you know, I don't know, what's berberine, right? You put that into the search, type 1 diabetes, berberine. Like if there are studies, there will be something.
They'll show up.
Something will show up. And again, like you don't need to be a trained scientist to say, I understand what this is saying. You can still get a general gist of what it's saying. So recognizing that you don't need to take everything as the gospel, but find the people and find the sources that are evidence-based that are also going to, you know, fit into your life. And if someone's way on the extreme, like there's people out there, hey, only eat fruits and vegetables, like probably not going to be the best for every person, or only eat meat and nothing else. Probably not the best for every person. Yeah. To your point, your parents' dedication, man. That was impressive. Like, I'm not saying
it's insane. Yeah.
Literally, like the fact she just want to do it with you. Like, I'm just like,
I'll never forget the moment where it was close to the snapping point. It was probably about 4 months in. Again, maybe my timelines are a little bit rough, but this was also like over 10 years ago. But I'll never forget the moment when my mom like walked into the room with a cup of her own urine. Into the room, I mean to the other bathroom in our home, because I would sit there for like 30 minutes, just like every day, by the way. I would sit there just staring at the cup, like not, you know, like thinking about my life. And yeah, I'm not going to get too dark on that, but yeah, you have a lot of deep thoughts and it really does change your life. But sometimes not in a good way, but in this case, I think I'm a very positive person, which kind of like morphed it into what is a good thing. I did want to make one point about the literature and how you said that there was no, like it's not usually on either side. I do want to point out, and it's very important to point out, that the literature is often based on averages. So for those of you that don't know or are not familiar back home, I think it's very important to point out that sometimes you might be an outlier. But when searching for terms like that, I think it's important that it gets you a baseline, right? It gets you a direction. Where your example of berberine, for example, you could type in berberine treatment of type 1 diabetes. Like that, those are the search terms. That's what you need, right? Like XYZ supplement treatment of type 1 diabetes. And if a scholarly article doesn't come up, you can type in on Google, because we live where the Google is, you just type in scholar at the end. And all of a sudden it'll show you all of the scholarly articles. And if you don't see one that looks like remotely similar, if you start to see, you know, mechanisms, it'll be like, I don't know, peptides, like it'll start showing you words you don't recognize. I don't know, beta glucan, like just random shit that you're just like, I don't recognize those. Okay, well then maybe that's like not the direction you need to go in, because usually that means that there's nothing directly related to what it is that you're looking for. Usually, not always, but again.
Well, and the rat models too. If you notice everything is in rats only, don't just assume that if it worked in the rats, it will work in the people. Because if that were the case, we would have probably had this cure. Like,
yeah, believe it or not, they're not just trying to hide the cure. I also thank you so much for bringing that up and reminding me of that, because I want to remind people, like there's a joke going on the internet. You know, you're like people, and maybe I'm on the dark side of the internet, but they're like, I'm hoping that I'm not on the plane with the guy that discovered the cure for cancer, because like the plane would go down. Like there's that like conspiracy theory, the plane will go down. Yes, there's that conspiracy theory, but also try to remember what it would be like to be that scientist that finds the cure. Do you like, I just need to remind people, imagine you're the scientist looking for the cure for diabetes. You want to be that motherfucker. You want to be that guy that finds, or that girl that finds the cure. Imagine your whole career would be set from then on in, right? So I always try to remind people of that. It's like no one is suppressing that information. It's just a very complex disease, especially type 1 diabetes. I think we'll be closer to finding a cure for type 2. And, you know, I mean, I say that with a grain of salt as well. But like finding a one-stop, like just a one pill form of cure for type 2 diabetes before we find one for type 1 because of the nature of being an autoimmune disease. When you create insulin, we've done it in the past in models where you get insulin into the body, and they tried it with stem cells as well. I was, reading in on that a lot recently, and they created insulin successfully in the body. But again, your body, what is type 1 diabetes? It's your body's autoimmune system attacking your own creation of insulin. So yes, you can get your body to recreate insulin. That hasn't been an issue for us, actually. In the literature, we have examples where we've done that, but the body just fights it back. So that's the nature of why type 1 diabetes research is so hard, is because we can recreate insulin. That's not the problem. The problem is recreating insulin and making your body go, don't fight this. So
the suppression part, like you said, it makes me think of all, the conspiracy people around the NFL or like pro sports who are like, oh, it's all rigged. It's like, how are you going to get all those people in on it? So for the same thing in the research, you're going to get every single person who's doing diabetes research in on it to be like, oh, we're making progress. We never that just wouldn't make any sense. And ethically, it wouldn't make any sense either.
No, of course, ethics goes out the window with conspiracy theories, but
for sure.
But let's talk about, they always say follow the money. So let's talk about how many people are required to be paid off. All of these people are broke college students, which, by the way, like the average PhD has like $200,000 in debt. So and mind you, most of those people, they don't know, people that with those conspiracy theories don't know these people. Like they don't know a PhD. If you know a PhD, they're, first of all, like they would more happily be in debt than take $1 from someone.
Well, as someone who did half of a PhD and left before their dissertation, I can definitely say everything you are saying is 100% true. Like it's almost a nobility thing.
It's a pride thing. Like It's almost an ego thing in the world of in the world of just PhDs and, what's it called as a whole, like research as a whole, like academia, I should say.
Yes.
In the world of academia, it's like it's just all noble. It's all nobility. It's all about like, yes, there is some corruption. I'm not going to say there's not, but that gets weeded out very quickly by just doing extra searches.
Yep.
Like, because of the beauty of science is it has to be, number one, repeatable.
I was about to say repeatability. It's if you can't be repeated and it's not so clear that it can be repeated, A, it's never going to get published, but B, like anyone taking you seriously ever.
Yes. And then again, those researchers, and I think it's, again, very important to point out, those researchers then lose their entire career that they just went $200,000 in debt to publish something that was a farce, to publish something that they're fighting for the rest of their life. You think they're ever going to get a job again? You think they're ever going to, not in that field, maybe at McDonald's.
Well, I've seen that there was a guy who, I won't name names, but way back in the day, before I did any grad school, I was in undergrad and I was like, oh, I'll do some exercise research. That'll be fun, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Started doing exercise research. It was chill. And over the span of about a year or so, it got way more popular. I didn't really like the dynamic of what was going on in the lab. So I pulled myself, went and did chemistry research. That was my degree. And I was like, all right, I'll go here and kind of watch from afar. And then all of the things came out over the next 3 years about, the data being messed up and, fabricated and other things about this particular person. Needless to say, he was no longer at the university. He's still out there. He's very much still out there. Props to him for doing what he's doing. But you can start to sniff that out pretty early, and it's also not super, super common. But what I will say is, when I went into grad school and there were people, I was in the nutrition side, I met people on the exercise side, and I'd bring up the name. They're like, oh, you want nothing. You should take all that stuff off your CV. You should not deal with any of that because you want nothing to do with that at all. So it's like you said, nobody's going to go out there and put their butt on the line. Very few people will, and just make up whatever needs to be made up for the sake of, for the sake of doing it. I don't think they're suppressing it. I just think it's painful because, I was diagnosed 25 years ago. Oh, we'll have a cure in 5 years. You're similar.
That was, firsthand. I've heard that many times. Yeah.
It's painful. But at the same time, though, in terms of, we go back to the pseudoscience for a second. So we've talked about the urine a little bit. I had my okra water experience where I was told, ironically, I don't know what, it was something else, another person who had, roots from Eastern Asia. And they were like, you have okra water. And they actually bought it for me. And I think I didn't actually end up drinking it. I was on a trip somewhere. I'm like, I can't bring this back in my suitcase. Sorry. And it just never got drank. But what other things have you been seeing relatively recently that are popping off? Because there's also the one I keep seeing, and I would love your thoughts on this too, is the whole resistant starch thing. The whole,
that's
rice and then make it cold and then eat it the next day.
Yeah.
Your number won't spike, but shoot.
So that one makes a circular resurgence. I think like that one is almost like cyclical in nature. Like it comes up and then it's gone for a couple months, and then it comes up and then it's gone for a couple months, and then it comes up. That one, and also dates and cinnamon. That one is always coming up a lot. Which again, I don't think these are pseudoscientific. Like they're not pseudoscientific. It's just that I think people don't realize the scale of them. So what I mean by that, and I'll go into a little bit more detail, is like all three examples are quite similar in nature. Resistant starches would impact your blood sugar, not to a significant degree though. So like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I definitely eat a lot of resistant starch rice, for example, because fried rices, right? So it will impact the speed at which it affects your blood sugar, but it doesn't usually have a notable impact, especially in the scale at which you eat it. All right, let's be honest. Look at the camera. Be honest. You're not eating this much of it. Eating this much. It's like hardly going to impact your carb count at all, ever. So I think it's very important to note that as well. And with dates too, like, yes, they have fiber, and yes, they have a slower response than, something else of the similar amount of carbohydrates, but it's still that total number of carbohydrates. So you still have to bolus for that current amount. And the only, like, the dates, I will say, is one example where I have to be cautious when I talk about it, because dates will, in the context of like sport, for example, because of the nature of them having that fiber and because of the nature of dates or dried fruit, but dates specifically, they taste sweet. So people tend to like carb count higher. And I think it's very important to like try to hone in the skill of carb counting with regards to dates and dried fruit, but dates specifically, because they're so sweet, we tend to carb count higher. So knowing how many carbs are actually in it is important. But also if you're in the context of sport, you're moving around, so the insulin acts quicker. That's one where I'd like be wary. But it definitely will still spike, right? Like people are posting these videos all the time and they always mention diabetes. They always mention diabetes. People with diabetes should be eating dates. People with diabetes should be eating more dates because it doesn't spike your blood sugar. It does. If you ever hear it doesn't spike your blood sugar, if it has calories, shocker to anyone. If it has calories, even if it doesn't have carbs, it will spike your blood sugar.
Thank you. Unless you're taking shots of olive oil, and that by itself will not. Unless there's other stuff with it. But also if you're taking shots of olive oil, we got a whole nother conversation we got to have.
You're still going to be gaining that weight because those calories aren't free, homie. But yeah, which long term, by the way, so correct me if I'm wrong, but this is why I didn't specify the olive oil. If you're taking shots of olive oil, long term, that could potentially impact your insulin resistance, in which case still impacts your blood sugar.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm saying like acute in that moment, like in that moment, you're not going to go to the moon because you decided, again, why would you be taking shots of olive oil? Separate conversation. But yeah, the thing that drives me nuts on this topic is when people say a food is free. There is no food that is free. There's no food that's, I can eat cheese. Cheese will jack up your number if you eat enough of it and if you're not careful. I don't care who I also think dairy. My hypothesis is everyone with type 1 has some sort of dairy issue, like insensitivity, where it's going to make them rise more than they should. But yeah, cheese will spike you. Cottage cheese, rude awakening to that one when I was on the bro science train. I'm like, I'll cottage cheese before bed. I'm 120 and I wake up at 280 and I wonder why. Like anything will get you. Peanut butter will spike you to the moon if you're not careful. You want a handful of almonds? That will affect you if you are not paying attention.
I had a recent, and this is a great, because I'll segue with a question, because I had a recent post with Alan Aragon. God, I love him, by the way. And I love that he'll actually like collaborate with me on posts while having a family and stuff. Shout out to that guy. And being an adamant researcher still and everything. So we had a post about protein. And I actually had, I'm thankful I have a few diabetics in my audience. And somebody called me out and was like, protein still spiked my blood sugar. They were very nice about it, but they called me out. And I love when people call me out, by the way. So if you're watching this and you have a question or you think I'm wrong about something, hit it in my comments. I almost always respond. Now it's getting a little bit tougher, but I try to respond to every single one with a well thought out response, not just a troll. And so they asked me about their protein is free, but my kid is, I think it was a mom of a child, my kid is spiking from XYZ thing. So my question to you, and I know how I responded. I remember how I generally responded. But my question is to you is, if someone were, let's say, not having a carnivore diet in nature, but one meal or one snack, as a dietitian, what do you tell someone is, how do you carb count something that's almost entirely protein?
That's tough. I think it depends on the nature of what it is and how much you're having. Because of course, from the science side, if there's no carbs to protect the protein, to spare it, the protein will eventually break down. If it's a big enough amount, and it's like, if it's chicken or something, like, you're not going to see anything for 60 to 90 minutes. So I'll tell someone, okay, take your protein grams roughly, and it's not perfect. Everyone's gonna be a little bit different. Technically, it's 58% will convert into glucose, but watch about half, watch about 40%. See what is happening. And in a perfect world, if you have the ability to extend it, extend something. But on the flip side, you may not. So watch, and you may have to hit it a couple times to make sure it's not going to go too high. But if it's red meat, if it's eggs, I know for me, eggs will send me to the freaking moon if I'm not.
Yeah, me also, actually. Yeah.
God, it's not just, I like genuinely, I'm like, am I the only weirdo where eggs just destroy me? So thank you. But
yeah. I'll eat just eggs because that's well, that's actually the example I would have given you is people just eat eggs for breakfast, which is great. But yeah, that's the common one that I get asked about.
Always to the moon if I'm not careful. But yeah, to that point, I'm usually looking at roughly for myself and for many others, typically about half, sometimes up to 60%, sometimes as low as, a third. But you're looking at that protein as carbs, and then you just have to decide how you'll administer. I would extend it if I had the ability to. I'm on the DIY loop, so I can't. So I'll just kind of plant the little seed, give it a little bit and give a little more. But
yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's probably how you responded, roughly the same.
So I'll tell you how I responded. I said a 1/3. So I said it was roughly 60% because again, I'm pretty sure I said the number was roughly. I don't think I would ever say it is on the dot 60. But because I don't speak in absolutes and comments specifically, and I don't think I do at all in general, but yeah, so I responded with, I would do like 1/3. I'm definitely always, keep in mind, guys, if you're still watching this and listening to me, I'm more on the cautious side of almost everything. I err on the side of caution always. So I also have like a massive fear of lows and like going to sleep low. And when that's a big one of mine. But yeah, I would say, so for me, for the eggs, for example, I take about 1/3, but even still, I'm laughing about it with you here, as you were saying, it takes you to the moon. Cause I'm like, that's the one food that like, I could do it with chicken and be chill because I eat a large amount of chicken in one sitting, or a large amount of tuna or whatever, any meat in one sitting. So I would actually have to take like a 1-to-3 ratio. That's kind of how I take my carbs for it, a 1-to-3. So relative to my normal carbs. So if I look at it as, if your carb count is 1-to-10 for carbs, I would take 1 to, what does that make it? 1 to like, Jesus, 30? Yeah, 1-to-30. So kind of, if that makes sense. So my carb count goes from 1-to-30 then. So hopefully that makes sense for people. I don't want to throw out too many random numbers, but like 30% less.
Well, and it's to the people listening, if you hear that, right? That is what is working for Ed and
for me.
Right. So yours will likely be different depending on age, how much you train, your insulin resistance looks like, eating. There's a million factors.
Stress.
Yes. Protein will like addressed in your dose, depending how much you're having and what else you're having. So know that it could be anywhere in that range that I was talking about. Could be on the 1/3 side, could be up at 6. I think the record I've seen for a patient was 75%, and it was eggs. They had like 6 eggs, 5 egg whites, and they were just, every time if they didn't go up 75%, they were done. Like they were 240, and the worst was they wouldn't come down. That's where I feel like everyone has to find individually, which is why you have to have a care team that knows their shit, because otherwise you're going to end up getting spoon-fed random information from wackos on the internet, and that's probably not going to serve you.
Right, exactly. And I think it's really important. This kind of leads me into one like red flag. If you're looking on the internet, one red flag if you're a diabetic or a parent of a diabetic, especially if you're a mom listening to this, a mom of a diabetic, because you're likely the one making the food. And if you're not a mom and you're the one making the food in the household, I'm sorry if you got offended by that. But in my experience, anyway, I think if you are a parent of a diabetic and you're feeding your diabetic, you're in charge of the feeding of your diabetic child, make sure that you know that all of these people that are a part of the care team usually, and I will say with 99% certainty, have an idea of your family history of illness, of medicine, of anything. So an entire family history of medicine. They also have your child's like data from previously that they're going by, which is extremely important because then that gives them an idea of they use this to generate numbers like their insulin sensitivity, their carb ratios. These carb ratios don't fucking come out of nowhere. They use the data to create these numbers. And yes, they're not always perfect, but that's why over time you fine tune them with your care team, which is why I always, and you know this because I mention it to you sometimes in DMs, but I mention it also to everyone on the internet. I'm not just like hiding in the DMs. Having a care team is so important to dealing with diabetes. I, as a kid, hated it, but the longer I'm alive, the more that I know that it's like, if you can keep this illness, my first endocrinologist always said, if you can keep this illness in a corner, then you got all control. Then you always have eyes on it. If it's all over the place, then it's going to start affecting your life. It's going to start affecting your ability to perform in sport, which is important for me, or it was important for me, but it's important now for like my clients and stuff. And it's important for everyone else. You know, if you're at work, you start having a low, well, you start babbling like a babbling brook, and you're like, you sound like the drunk guy, but you didn't have any drinks. So you missed on all the fun stuff, but now you're drunk at work. So it's like having it silly, right? Having a low for me is not a big deal. I try to not make it a big deal for people, but most people that are type 1 diabetic don't have the luxury of time like I do in their day, or flexibility like I do, or like maybe you do, where you can just be like, hey, give me a moment, right? And I'm sitting by a carb all the time. Some people work active jobs. Some people are working in construction or whatever. So having your blood sugars in check and having a team that understands your life and understands how different things have been impacting your blood sugar through these conversations, these meetings, is so incredibly important to getting better control. And therefore, if you have better control, you have better quality of life and a higher likelihood of surviving for longer. Because if not controlled, diabetes does impact your length of life. But if controlled, you're looking at a similar lifespan to everyone else.
Well, and that's the important part, I think, to really recognize is it, just like you said before, as kids, like you want the kid to have as normal life as possible. If you're in control as a kid, as an adult, you will be just fine. Like you will live pretty much the same as somebody without diabetes. And honestly, I would be inclined to say almost quality of life could be better because we're paying more attention to our health.
I would agree.
So I always wonder to this day, I'm like, what would have happened? Like if I didn't have diabetes, like would I be doing what I do? Would I, be a CDE? Would I be an RD? I'm like, I don't know, probably, but it's easy to say that now because there's no way to go back and find out the I learned in grad school, right? Of what's the alternative universe where I never got the beatus, which I would love to see that at some point. But regardless, you don't have to have it. It doesn't have to be a life sentence. It's literally just, I would say it's on a stove. It's humming behind you. You have the burner on, you're watching it. It's good. It's chilling, but it's not bothering you. You're going about your life. It's there. And when you're ready for it, I guess a slow cooker would probably work too. When you're ready for it, you deal with it and you put it back. Done. Like it does not have to be complex. I'm grateful we've had to have this conversation today because it's always great to get a refreshing outlook and just be able to also just blast through a lot of the BS that's out there because there's so much of it. And I know you're snarky in some of the videos and I'm snarky in some of the videos, but I feel like you have to have fun with it too because it's just that dumb that I always tell like, say stupid things, get stupid responses. Like,
I will say to that, and I will actually, obviously I haven't seen every single piece of your content, but I've seen a lot of it and I try to interact with it whenever I do see it. But what I will say is based on what I've seen, or at least I'll give the blanket on everything. I would say you're quite, and the same with me. I think we're respectful. Even if those people are like absolutely speaking rubbish, I think what's interesting about our content is we do still give back a lot of value and not everyone will see that. My snarkiness, I am quite snarky. I'm very petty. That's the word I would use. I'm extremely petty. Don't get it twisted. I'm very petty, but I'm also respectful. I'm never making fun of people. There's a select few that have now been made fun of on my page and where I think bullying is important to reel it back in a little bit. I'm totally kidding. I don't think bullying is important, but that's like an exaggeration for the term for the story. But I think it's very important that we we recognize that we're not just making the video to make fun of someone. We're making the video to show an idea that somebody has come up with and show all the holes in the theory. Because all of what they say is a theory, right? Until it's proven, it is a theory. And the problem with most of the videos that we choose, it's like, oh, well, you're only picking videos where like, well, yes, those are I'm picking videos that I know I can pick apart because why else would I make a video if it's correct? There are sometimes I do make a video when it is correct. And for many reasons, I don't make a lot of them. One reason is I don't see a lot of them. That's a big one. I don't see a lot of correct videos because those don't get pushed out as much as incorrect videos do. Right. And to that second point, my videos, I want a lot of people to see my videos, not for the sake of me just growing my audience, but also that is a side part. I do want to grow my audience, of course, but the negative ones, if I can turn it into something positive, which is always my goal, is to turn it into something positive because the negative ones will get your attention and that will be my opportunity to teach you something. That is always my goal, is use the negative to create a positive. And sometimes that involves my snarky BS attitude, which a lot of people don't like it and it is what it is, but I hate to say it, those people that don't like it, thanks for engaging.
Oh, I was going to say, I feel like there's times, and I've always been told that like you don't have any haters at all. You're obviously not doing anything noteworthy or worthwhile. At the same time, I feel like having the ability to take something that could potentially, I would even go as far to say harm people, with misinformation and saying, hey, let's flip it. So now you know what the actual information is that you should have taken away from this video. I think that's absolutely, for lack of a better term, it's God's work. That's literally what it is. And it's all about the frame and how we see it. But with this, I feel like we could be here for the next 2 hours. So I won't keep you much longer, but I got to ask you what I ask every single person that comes on here. Yeah. What do you think is the most underrated thing for managing blood sugars? It can be anything. Like the thing that people don't talk about. We know carbs are going to impact your blood sugar. We know that exercise. Underrated. What's the biggest thing?
Well, I think the most underrated thing is honestly walking. Like it's exercise, but like most people don't ever think of it as exercise. So the one thing that I always recommend to people is people go, oh man, but I don't, like when I tell people you got to walk, and I'll tell people, they ask me, oh, well, how much do you walk? That's first of all, a terrible fucking retort. Don't come back at me with, well, how much do you do? I do 15,000, like I average 13,000 for the last 4 years. So if I'm averaging 13,000 steps a day, that's an insane step count. And you're going to immediately be discouraged. No. If you have time for a 10-minute walk after each meal, that's 30 minutes in a day. But break it down. I always try to tell people, break it down. A 10-minute walk after each meal, it aids with digestion, but also it reduces bloating, which most people apparently have a problem with. And 3, by the end of the day, it makes your that'll add on average. In 10 minutes, most people can get 1,000 steps. And if you're going, oh my God, but I'm shorter. Yeah, you'll get them faster then, because if you take smaller steps, you take more of them. So, and it's not a distance thing. Just take 10 minutes, walk around leisurely. It doesn't have to be insane. It's not intensive. Most people are scared by exercise. It'll improve insulin sensitivity long-term. It'll in the amount of exercise they're having. And then especially if you're someone who works all day, it'll also improve your productivity. You don't realize it, but it'll improve your productivity. So a lot of the things are applicable to everyone, but it'll also help your diabetes management, because nothing's worse than when you're sitting with a high. And I think most people, if they are diabetic listening to this, are going to be like, you're sitting there with a high. What's the one thing you want to do is just sit. You just want to you just kind of form into the place where you're sitting, right? Imagine if you could walk a little bit. It takes a lot. Don't get me wrong. I'm not speaking from a place of oh my God, I just go for a walk. I'm godly. I don't get affected by highs. No, I definitely feel ugh. But every time after I get that, even just 10, 15-minute walk, it will reduce my blood sugar. Even a 10, 15-minute walk will reduce it. Obviously not as much as insulin, but it'll help the insulin act faster. So especially if you are running high and you inject, for example, me, I inject in my legs. This might be anecdote, but I find that it helps increase the speed at which it works if you are working that muscle where you injected, if that makes sense. So on leg days, I feel like my insulin acts like this. So might be anecdote. I actually don't have a ton of research to back that up, but off my head, but I'm sure there is a ton.
I was going to say, it's definitely, if it's not anecdote just for you, the N is definitely bigger than 1, because I've seen that all the time. You do an upper body day and you inject into your arm or your shoulder. Oh, there you go. Straight down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Walking, I'm not sure anybody's actually talked about walking, because you're not even saying it in the sense of exercise. You're saying it in the sense of, and a supplemental thing that can benefit. Yeah. And I've even seen it as we build on this step count. For me, my minimum for a day, I will not stop till I have at least 7,500. Ideally, I'm up closer to 10. But with that, if I have a day where I don't have any steps, I'm at 2,500, I will notice my blood sugar is lingering higher. And the closer I get up to that threshold, the more I come down and back into range. And I'm oh, it's funny how that works. Your body actually gets used to the number of steps. So massive W for people that are listening. And also, so people can find the infamous videos. Where can people find you?
So I am Evident. I don't have it behind me. It's up right there. Evidence Nutrition. So if you just type in Evidence Nutrition, I'll usually come up. Or I think now if you just type my name, Edin, Edin, that comes up. But yeah, I'm Evidence Nutrition on all platforms, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. So if you guys are interested, I appreciate having you along. And if you guys ever have any questions, DM me. I pride myself on eventually getting through all of them. I do have a lot to get through now. And of course, with the blow-ups recently, I'm getting a lot more. But if you send me creepy DMs, I will not respond. So
fantastic.
Yeah. Just thought I'd point that out. If you send me something that makes someone feel uncomfortable and you don't get a response, that's probably why. Because I felt uncomfortable.
Gift incoming. Just wait.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to start seeing crazy stuff in my DMs. But yeah, I appreciate the conversation. It was cathartic for me. So I hope if anybody has any questions, like I said, or if anybody related to it, hopefully this is a useful conversation and maybe we can run it back.
Oh, we will absolutely be running it back. I feel like not only is there more stuff on the pseudoscience to talk about, but there's so many things in general that we can just absolutely go ham on that people will have questions on and want to know about. So thank you for listening to this episode. If you're loving it, you got questions, holler at me, Instagram, TikTok at Man of Zeal. And of course, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify and you are loving the show and getting something from it, definitely drop us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. And I will see you in the next episode.
Hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey.